Welcome to my channel. Please like this video and subscribe. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. Reed Monroe stood in his kitchen, carefully chopping vegetables for the anniversary dinner he had planned. The sharp edge of his chef's knife sliced smoothly through the bell peppers and onions, his motions precise and practiced. He glanced at the clock. It was 5:30 p.m. Carmen would be home soon. Right on cue, he heard the front door creak open and shut, followed by the sound of approaching footsteps. Carmen entered, still dressed in her work outfit, a sleek pencil skirt paired with a silk blouse. Her dark hair was neatly tied back, although a few strands had loosened, framing her face. "Hey," she greeted, her tone tense. "What's all this?" Reed placed the knife down and turned to her, wiping his hands on a towel. "Dinner," he responded simply, "for our anniversary." Carmen's eyes widened slightly in surprise. Right, of course. She glanced around, noticing the wine chilling in an ice bucket, the unlit candles on the table, and the soft music playing in the background. Reed observed her closely, noticing the way she shifted her weight and fiddled with her purse strap. "Is everything okay?" he asked. Carmen forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, just a little stressed." "Work's been hectic," she replied, hesitating briefly before adding, "Actually, about that. I hate to say this, but I need to head back to the office. There's a last-minute project, and the client's putting pressure on us." Reed felt the familiar tightness in his chest, a blend of disappointment and suspicion that had become all too common in recent months. He kept his expression neutral and voice calm. "On our anniversary." Carmen's guilt was evident in her eyes. "I know, I'm sorry. I'll make it up to you, I promise. It's just, this could lead to a big promotion for me." Reed nodded slowly. "Right, of course." He turned back to the cutting board, picking up the knife again. "Don't worry about it. Go do what you need to do." Carmen hesitated. "Are you sure you're not upset?" she asked, her voice uncertain. Reed glanced over his shoulder, his face expressionless. "It's fine, Carmen. I understand work comes first." She stepped closer and placed a hand on his arm. "Hey, that's not fair. You know how important this is to me, to us. A promotion would mean." "I said it's fine." Reed cut in, his tone sharper than intended. He took a deep breath and softened his voice. "Really? Go ahead, we can celebrate another time." Carmen leaned in and kissed his cheek. "You're the best. I'll try not to be too late with that." She was gone, the sound of her heels echoing on the hardwood floor as she walked out. Reed stood still for a moment after hearing the door close, then began to clean up, his movements deliberate. He poured the chopped vegetables into a container, placing it in the fridge. The wine was returned to the liquor cabinet, and the candles were blown out, their thin smoke fading into the air. As he worked, his thoughts raced. This wasn't the first time Carmen had cancelled plans last minute. Late nights at the office were becoming more frequent, as were hushed phone calls that abruptly ended when he entered the room. He had tried to ignore the signs, to give her the benefit of the doubt, but doubt had a way of gnawing at the back of his mind. Reed glanced at the clock. 6:15 p.m. He made a decision. Grabbing his keys, he headed out to his car. The streets of Chicago were alive with evening traffic as Reed drove towards the financial district where Carmen worked. He parked a block from her office building and waited, eyes fixed on the entrance. Minutes dragged into an hour, and just as Reed considered leaving, he saw her. Carmen stepped out of the building, but she wasn't alone. A tall man with sandy blonde hair was with her, his hand resting casually on the small of her back. Reed recognized him instantly. Shane Rea, the graphic designer from Carmen's office. Reed had met him at a company party, noticing the way Shane's gaze had lingered on Carmen a little too long. Back then, Reed dismissed it as harmless flirtation. But now, watching them walk together towards Shane's car, laughing and leaning in close, a cold certainty settled in his gut. Reed followed them at a distance, gripping the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. They didn't head to Carmen's office or any nearby restaurant. Instead, Shane's car wound its way through the city until it stopped at a familiar bar, the Rusty Nail, Shane's favorite spot. Reed parked across the street, his thoughts spinning. He could storm in now, confront them, demand answers. But something held him back, a calculating voice urging him to wait, to gather more evidence before taking action. So he waited. From his car, Reed watched through the bar's large front window as Carmen and Shane sat at a corner table, leaning close, their hands intertwined on the table. At one point, Shane reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind Carmen's ear, his hand lingering on her cheek. A sharp pain shot through Reed's chest, followed by a wave of cold fury. He forced himself to stay put, breathing in short, sharp bursts, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Hours passed and the bar slowly emptied. Finally, just after midnight, Carmen and Shane stumbled out, leaning into each other as they walked to Shane's car. Reed's jaw clenched as he watched Shane open the passenger door for Carmen, his hand resting on her waist as she got in. Reed followed them again, this time to an unfamiliar apartment complex. He parked across the street, watching as they made their way inside. For a long moment, Reed sat in silence, his emotions swirling. Then, with deliberate intent, he stepped out of his car and crossed the street. He found Shane's name on the buzzer panel and noted the apartment number. Back in his car, Reed waited. He wasn't entirely sure what he was waiting for, but he knew he couldn't leave. Not yet. He needed undeniable proof of what he already suspected deep down. As the hours passed, Reed's anger shifted, evolving from a fiery, impulsive rage into something cooler and more methodical. He thought about the years he and Carmen had spent together, the life they had built. He reflected on trust and betrayal, on loyalty and deception. Gradually, a plan began to take shape in his mind. Just as dawn began to break, casting a faint glow over the sky, movement in one of the apartment windows caught Reed's eye. He saw them, Carmen and Shane, entwined in each other's arms, locked in a passionate kiss. The sight should have devastated him, torn him apart. Instead, Reed felt an eerie calm, almost as if he was detached from the situation. With measured hands, he turned on his car's headlights, directing the bright beams straight at Shane's window. The sudden glare pierced the early morning darkness, lighting up the scene inside like a spotlight. Reed watched as Carmen and Shane pulled away from each other, startled by the light. Their confusion was plain to see, quickly morphing into panic as they rushed to the window. Finally, Reed saw the moment Carmen's eyes widened in horror as she recognized his car. For a long moment, Reed held her gaze. He didn't shout, didn't wave his arms wildly. He just stared, his expression cold and furious. Then, without a word, he shifted his car into gear and drove off, leaving Carmen and Shane frozen in place, illuminated by the harsh light of his headlights. Reed drove aimlessly for a while, his mind strangely quiet. The city was slowly coming to life around him, joggers and dog walkers beginning their routines. Eventually, he found himself parked outside a familiar bar, the Grindstone, owned by his best friend Zane. The closed sign still hung in the window, but Reed knew Zane would be inside, getting ready for the day. He knocked on the door with 3 firm raps, the sound echoing in the quiet street. A moment later, Zane appeared. His annoyed expression shifted to concern when he saw Reed and quickly unlocked the door. "Reed, what are you doing here so early?" "You look awful, man," Zane said, opening the door wider to let him in. Reed stepped inside, the familiar scent of stale beer and wood polish wrapping around him like a comforting blanket. "I need a drink," he said simply. Zane raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. He locked the door behind Reed and moved to the bar, pulling out a bottle of top-shelf whiskey and 2 glasses. "All right, talk to me. What's going on?" Reed settled onto a bar stool and took the glass Zane slid towards him. He took a long sip, letting the burn of the whiskey ground him. Then, in a flat, emotionless voice, he started to talk. He told Zane everything from the cancelled anniversary dinner to his suspicions about Carmen and Shane, from following them to the damning scene in the apartment window. Zane listened in silence, refilling their glasses when necessary, his expression darkening with each new detail. When Reed finally finished, Zane let out a low whistle. "Man, I'm so sorry. What are you going to do now?" Reed took another sip of his whiskey, his eyes cold and focused. "I'm not going to forgive," he said, his voice like ice. "I'm going to destroy them." Zane nodded slowly, understanding the depth of Reed's pain and the intensity of his resolve. He raised his glass in a simple toast. "To payback," he said solemnly. A small, dangerous smile flickered on Reed's lips as he clinked his glass against Zane's. "To payback," he echoed, his mind already racing with ideas for revenge. As they drank, the first rays of sunlight filtered through the bar's windows, signaling the start of a new day. But for Reed, it marked the beginning of something else, a calculated, relentless pursuit of vengeance against those who had wronged him. The game was over, and now it was time for Carmen and Shane to face the consequences of their actions. Reed woke early the next morning, his mind clear despite the lack of sleep. He had spent the night on Zane's couch, unable to face going back to the house he shared with Carmen. As the first light of day crept through the blinds, he prepared himself for what lay ahead. Zane was already in the kitchen, brewing coffee. He looked up when Reed entered, concern written on his face. How are you holding up? Manzane asked, handing him a mug. Reed took a long sip before answering. I'm fine. I know what I have to do. Zane leaned against the counter, studying Reed's expression. You sure about this? Once you go down this road, there's no turning back. Reed's voice was firm. I know. But she made her decision, and now I have to make mine. Zane nodded slowly. All right, what's the plan? Reed set his mug down, his eyes hard with determination. First, I need to go home. There are some things I need to handle. The drive back to his house felt surreal. When he pulled into the driveway, he saw that Carmen's car was already there. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation ahead. As he walked inside, he heard movement upstairs. Carmen appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes swollen and red from crying. Reed, where have you been? I've been calling you all night, she said, her voice shaky. Reed ignored her, moving purposefully into the dining room. He pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase and placed it on the table. Carmen followed him, her voice trembling. Reed, please, we need to talk about this. It's not what you think. Isn't it? Reed's voice was sharp as he turned to face her. Because I think I saw my wife in another man's apartment last night. I think I saw her kissing him. So tell me, Carmen, what part of that did I misunderstand? Carmen flinched at his words. I made a mistake. It was stupid, I know that, but it didn't mean anything. Shane and I, we just... Save it. Reed cut her off, gesturing to the envelope on the table. Divorce papers. I had them drawn up months ago. Carmen's eyes widened in shock. Months ago? But why? Reed laughed bitterly. Because I'm not an idiot, Carmen. The late nights at work, the whispered phone calls, the way you'd pull away every time I tried to get close, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to believe it. Tears welled up in Carmen's eyes. Reed, please, we can fix this. I'll end things with Shane, I promise. It was just a fling. It didn't mean anything. A fling? Reed's voice was dangerously quiet. Is that what you call betraying your marriage vows? Breaking the trust of someone who stood by you for 10 years? Carmen reached out to touch his hand, but Reed stepped back, avoiding her. I'm sorry, she pleaded. I'm so sorry. Please give me another chance. I love you. For a moment, Reed said nothing. Then, in a cold, controlled voice, he replied, You made your choice, Carmen. Now you have to live with it. He turned away from her, picking up a notepad from the counter. As he wrote, he continued speaking. I've already started the process to sell the house. Carmen gasped. What? But you can't do that without my consent. Reed looked up, his eyes hard. Actually, I can. Remember that refinancing we did last year? The one you were too busy to handle, so you gave me power of attorney? Well, turns out that was very convenient. He tore the note from the pad and attached it to the divorce papers. There's your freedom with Shane. I'm sure you two will be very happy together. Carmen's face crumpled in despair. Reed, please don't do this. We can work it out. We can go to counseling. There's nothing to work out, Reed interrupted coldly. You made your bed, Carmen. Now lie in it. Without another word, he turned and walked out, ignoring the sound of Carmen's sobs behind him. As he climbed into his car, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. The first stage of his plan was complete. The next few days flew by in a whirlwind of tasks. Reed moved into a small apartment, immersing himself in his work by day and plotting his revenge by night. He ignored Carmen's frequent calls and messages, each one more frantic than the last. About a week after their confrontation, he received a call from an unfamiliar number. He answered wearily. Mr. Monroe, a woman's voice came through. This is Lila Eastwood from HR at Pinnacle Marketing. I hope it's okay that I'm calling, but there's been some chatter in the office, and I thought you should know. Reed's curiosity was piqued. What kind of chatter, Ms. Eastwood? Lila paused before replying. About your wife, well, ex-wife and Shane Riker. It's what everyone's talking about. I just wanted you to know that not everyone sides with them. What they did, it's not right. I appreciate that, Ms. Eastwood, Reed said cautiously. But why are you telling me this? After a brief silence, she said, Let's just say I don't have any respect for people who break their promises. Her tone hardened. If there's anything I can do to help. Reed smiled to himself. Actually, Ms. Eastwood, there might be. How about we meet for coffee? The following day, Reed sat in a cozy cafe, waiting for Lila. She arrived on time, a petite woman with a no-nonsense demeanor. Mr. Monroe, she greeted him, sliding into the seat across from him. Please call me Reed, he replied. And thank you for reaching out. I appreciate your discretion in all this. Lila nodded, her sharp eyes focused. Of course. Now what can I do to help? Reed leaned forward and lowered his voice. I need information, Lila. Anything you can tell me about Carmen and Shane's relationship, how long it's been going on, who knows about it, how it's affecting their work. Without hesitation, Lila began, it's been at least 6 months as far as I can tell. They thought they were being subtle, but she scoffed. Discretion isn't really their strong suit. And as for who knows, pretty much everyone. The gossip spread fast after you confronted them. Reed nodded, processing the information. And their work? How's it being affected? Carmen's slipping, Lila said bluntly. She's distracted, making mistakes. As for Shane, his charm's wearing thin. People are starting to see him for what he really is. And what's that? Reed asked. Genuinely curious. Lila's expression darkened. A selfish, manipulative jerk who doesn't care who he hurts as long as he gets what he wants. Reed couldn't help but smile. It seemed he had found an unexpected ally. Thank you, Lila. This is very helpful. Is there anything else I should know? After a brief hesitation, Lila reached into her bag and handed him a USB drive. This has some sensitive information, emails, calendar entries, things like that. I probably shouldn't have access to it, but she shrugged. People forget to log out of their computers. Reed took the drive, slipping it into his pocket. I appreciate this, Lila, more than you know. As they parted ways, Reed felt a surge of satisfaction. His plan was coming together. Over the next few weeks, he used the information Lila had given him, strategically anonymous tips to Carmen's bosses about her declining work, carefully leaked emails hinting at her relationship with Shane, and rumors spread in the right circles. He watched from a distance as Carmen's carefully built professional image began to unravel. The whispers and judgmental stares followed her everywhere, and her once confident stride became hesitant, her head bowed under the weight of her colleagues' disapproval. One evening, as Reed was leaving his office, his phone buzzed with a text from Zane. You need to see this. Come to the bar. Intrigued, Reed made his way to the grindstone. When he arrived, Zane motioned for him to join him at the end of the bar, where a small TV was mounted on the wall. Watch, Zane said, turning up the volume. The news anchor was mid-report ... Forced resignation of Shane Riker from Pinnacle Marketing. Sources close to the company cite inappropriate workplace behavior as the reason for his departure. This follows several complaints filed with HR. Reed couldn't suppress the small smile that crept across his face. Zane noticed and raised an eyebrow. You're doing? He asked. Reed shrugged, feigning innocence. He made his bed. Zane shook his head, a mix of admiration and concern in his eyes. Remind me never to cross you, man. As they shared a drink, Reed's phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Carmen. After a moment's hesitation, he answered. What do you want, Carmen? Her voice came through, shaky and desperate. Reed, please, I need to talk to you. Can we meet? Reed thought for a moment before deciding. Fine. My apartment. 1 hour. He hung up without waiting for a response. Zane gave him a questioning look. You sure about this? Reed nodded, his expression cold. It's time to end this. An hour later, there was a knock at his apartment door. He opened it to find Carmen standing there, a shadow of her former self, her eyes red and puffy, her usually immaculate appearance disheveled. Come in, Reed said, his voice devoid of emotion. Carmen stepped inside, her eyes scanning the sparse apartment. Reed, I don't even know where to start. How about with the truth? Reed suggested icily. Carmen flinched at his tone. I'm sorry, she whispered. I made a terrible mistake. I've lost everything, my job, my reputation, Shane. Shane? Reed raised an eyebrow. What happened with him? Carmen let out a bitter laugh. He dumped me. Said I was too much drama. Can you believe that? I threw everything away for him. And now, nothing. Tears welled up in her eyes. What do you want from me? Carmen, Reed asked, his voice hard. She looked up at him, pleading. A second chance, please. I know I don't deserve it, but I love you. I always have. What I did with Shane was stupid and selfish, but it didn't mean anything. You're the one I want to be with. For a long moment, Reed said nothing, studying her face. Finally, he shook his head slowly. No, he said firmly. Carmen's face crumpled. Reed, please. No, he repeated, his tone unyielding. You're right, you don't deserve a second chance. What you did wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. You chose to betray me, to lie, to throw away 10 years of marriage. For what? A fling with a coworker. He stepped closer, his eyes locking with hers. You made your choice, Carmen. Now, you have to live with it. I don't love you anymore. In fact, I don't even think I ever really knew you. Carmen broke down, sobbing, reaching out to him. Reed, please, I'll do anything. I'll change, I swear, just give me one more chance, Carmen begged, her voice filled with desperation. Reed stepped back, avoiding her outstretched hand. It's too late for that, Carmen. We're done. The divorce will be finalized soon, and then you'll be out of my life for good. Carmen's voice cracked as she cried out, What am I supposed to do? I've lost everything. Reed's face remained unmoved as he opened the door. That's not my problem anymore. Goodbye, Carmen. As the door closed on her tearful form, a wave of finality washed over him. It was done. He had dismantled the life she had recklessly thrown away, piece by piece. She had made her choices, and now she would have to live with them. Reed walked to the window, staring out at the city skyline. The sun was setting, casting shades of orange and pink across the sky. As the light faded, he felt a burden lift from his shoulders. The anger, pain, and betrayal were still there, but they were now overshadowed by a quiet sense of satisfaction. He had not only survived but come out on top. Carmen and Shane had believed they could fool him, but he had shown them otherwise. They had underestimated him, and that had been their downfall. As darkness settled over the city, Reed turned away from the window. He had a new life to build, one free from the shadows of lies and deceit, and for the first time in a long while, Reed felt something new: hope. The game was over, and Reed Monroe had the last laugh. The sun had barely risen when Reed's phone buzzed with a message, You need to see this Shane's apartment. Frowning, Reed quickly dressed and headed out. When he arrived at Shane's building, Lila pulled up at the same time. What's going on? Reed asked as they approached the entrance. Lila's eyes sparkled with a mix of excitement and vindication. Carmen showed up about an hour ago. They've been arguing ever since, loudly. Reed raised an eyebrow. And how do you know that? Lila smirked. I made friends with Shane's neighbor. She's been keeping me updated. When they reached Shane's floor, an older woman was standing in the hallway, her ear pressed to Shane's door. She looked up as they arrived, nodding knowingly at Lila. You're just in time, she whispered. It's getting good. Reed stepped closer to the door, hearing Carmen's voice more clearly. How could you do this to me, Shane? After everything I gave up for you, her voice was sharp, filled with desperation. Shane's response was cold and indifferent. Come on, Carmen, you didn't really think we'd ride off into the sunset together, did you? I left my husband for you, Carmen shouted. I lost my job, my reputation, everything. And that's my problem. How Shane's voice was dripping with disdain. It was fun while it lasted, but let's be real, you're too much drama. I don't need this in my life. There was a moment of stunned silence, then the sound of something smashing against a wall. Carmen screamed, You ruined my life, you bastard! Shane's cruel laughter echoed through the door, making Reed's fists clench. No, sweetheart, you did that to yourself. I didn't force you to cheat on your husband or risk your job. That was all you. Suddenly the door flew open, and Shane stormed out, nearly bumping into Reed. He stumbled back, eyes wide with surprise. Reed, what the hell are you doing here? Before Reed could respond, Carmen appeared in the doorway, her face streaked with tears, her hair in disarray. She froze when she saw him, her expression a mix of shame and despair. Reed, I can explain, she stammered. Reed held up his hand, cutting her off. Turning to Shane, his voice was dangerously calm. You and I need to talk. Shane's confidence wavered under Reed's cold gaze. Look, man, I don't want any trouble. You should have thought of that before you slept with my wife, Reed interrupted. He glanced at Lila. Could you give us a moment? Lila nodded, guiding the neighbor away. Reed turned back to Shane and Carmen. Both of you, inside, now. They obeyed, walking back into Shane's apartment, the tension thick in the air. Reed closed the door behind them, surveying the scene. A shattered vase lay on the floor, water and flowers scattered across the hardwood. Sit, Reed ordered, pointing to the couch. Carmen and Shane sat down, looking like scolded children. Reed remained standing, his posture rigid. I want you both to listen very carefully, Reed began, his tone icy. He turned to Carmen first. You made a choice, Carmen. You chose to throw away our marriage, betray my trust, and destroy the life we built together. And for what? For him. He jerked his head towards Shane, who flinched. Carmen opened her mouth to speak, but Reed silenced her with a look. I'm not finished. You want to know the worst part? It's not the affair itself, it's the lies. For months you looked me in the eye and lied. Every late night at the office, every hushed phone call, every time you pulled away, all lies. He then turned to Shane. And you think you're some kind of genius, don't you? The office charmer, the guy who can get any woman he wants. Did sneaking around with a married woman make you feel powerful? Did it inflate your ego knowing you were destroying someone else's life? Shane's face reddened with anger. Hey, I didn't force her to do anything. She came to me. Shut up, Reed snapped. You're both adults. You both made your choices, and now you'll both face the consequences. He pulled out his phone, showing them the screen. I have everything: emails, text messages, photos. Your little affair wasn't as secret as you thought. I could destroy what's left of your careers and reputations with this. Carmen gasped, her face turning pale. Reed, please, you wouldn't. Wouldn't I? Reed's voice was ice cold. You didn't think I'd find out about your affair, did you? You both underestimated me. He pocketed his phone. But I'm not going to do that. Not because you don't deserve it, but because you're not worth the effort. You've already ruined your own lives. Reed turned to leave, but Shane's voice stopped him. That's it. You're just going to walk away. Reed slowly turned back, his eyes locking onto Shane's. What did you expect? That I'd punch you? That we'd have some dramatic showdown? He shook his head. You're not worth it, Shane. Neither of you are. He glanced at Carmen one last time. The divorce will be finalized next week. After that, I never want to see or hear from either of you again. Understand? Carmen nodded, tears streaming down her face. Shane just looked away, jaw clenched. Reed opened the door, pausing briefly. You know, I almost feel sorry for you both. Almost, and with that, he walked out, closing the door firmly behind him. Lila was waiting in the hallway, her eyes wide with curiosity. Well, what happened? Reed gave her a small smile. It's over. Let's get out of here.
As they exited the building, Layla glanced at Reed's face. Are you all right? She asked. Reed took a deep breath, thinking about the question. You know, I think I am. For the first time in a long while, I feel free.
Layla nodded, with a glimmer of admiration in her eyes. You're stronger than I could have been. I don't know if I would have been able to face them like that. Reed shrugged. They don't have any power over me anymore. I took that away from them. As they went their separate ways, Reed felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had confronted his betrayers, looked them straight in the eye, and walked away on his own terms. It was a victory, though it tasted bittersweet. The following days blurred together as Reed threw himself into work, staying late at the office and taking on extra tasks. Focusing on coding made it easier to avoid thinking about the wreckage of his personal life. That Friday evening, as Reed was packing up to head home, his boss stopped by his desk. Got a minute, Reed? Reed nodded and followed him to the office. His boss closed the door behind them, his face serious. I'm going to get straight to the point, Reed. We've been really impressed with your work lately, really impressed. I know you've been going through personal stuff, but your performance has been exceptional. Reed sat up a little straighter. Thank you, sir. I've been trying to stay focused. His boss nodded. It shows. That's why I wanted to talk to you. We've got a big new project coming up, a Fortune 500 client, cutting-edge technology. We need our best people on it, and we want you to lead the development team. Reed blinked in surprise. Lead the team? Are you sure? Absolutely, his boss replied with a smile. It comes with a significant raise and a promotion to senior developer. What do you say? A slow grin spread across Reed's face. I say, when do I start? As Reed left the office that evening, his step was lighter than it had been in months. He pulled out his phone and called Zane. Hey man, are you free tonight? I've got some news and we're celebrating. A few hours later, Reed sat at the bar at the Grindstone, sipping whiskey as he filled Zane in on the past week's events. Zane let out a low whistle. Damn, Reed. Confronting Carmen and Shane, landing a huge promotion. You've been busy. Reed chuckled. It's been one hell of a week. Zane studied his friend's face. How are you really doing, though, with everything? Reed took a sip of his drink, thinking over the question. Honestly, I'm okay. Actually, better than okay. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm in control of my life. Like I'm moving forward instead of just treading water. Zane nodded, clapping him on the shoulder. I'm proud of you, man. You've been through a lot, but you've come out stronger. As they continued talking and drinking, Reed felt a sense of calm settle over him. He had survived the storm and emerged from the ruins of his marriage, not just unscathed but stronger. He had confronted his betrayers and walked away on his own terms. The next week flew by as Reed threw himself into preparing for his new role at work. He barely noticed when the final divorce papers arrived. He signed them without a second thought, feeling a sense of closure as he dropped them in the mailbox on Saturday morning. Later that day, Reed found himself driving through his old neighborhood. He hadn't planned to, but something had drawn him back. As he turned onto his old street, he saw a moving truck parked in front of his former home. Reed pulled over and watched as a young family bustled about carrying boxes and furniture inside. A little girl chased a dog across the lawn, her laughter floating on the breeze. It was a scene of domestic bliss, so similar to what he had once imagined for himself and Carmen. As he sat there lost in thought, Reed noticed a familiar figure on the sidewalk. Carmen stood frozen, staring at the scene before her. She looked worn out, a far cry from the polished professional she had once been. For a moment, Reed considered driving away, but something made him step out of the car instead. He approached her slowly, stopping a few feet away. "Carmen," he said softly. She startled, turning to face him. Her eyes widened in recognition, a mix of emotions flashing across her face: shame, regret, longing. "Reed," she whispered. "What are you doing here?" Reed shrugged. "Just driving by. You?" Carmen's eyes flicked back to the house. "I don't know. I just needed to see it one last time, I guess." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the happy family move into their old home. Finally, Carmen spoke again, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry, Reed. For everything. I know it doesn't change anything, but I really am sorry." Reed really looked at her for the first time in months. He could see how much the divorce had worn her down, the dark circles under her eyes, the slump of her shoulders, the defeat in her posture. For a moment he felt a flicker of pity. But then he remembered the lies, the betrayal, and the hurt she had caused him. The pity faded, replaced by a cool detachment. "You're right," he said calmly. "It doesn't change anything." Carmen winced at his words but nodded. "I know. I just wanted you to know. I've lost everything, Reed. My job, my reputation, my life. And it's all my fault." Reed sighed. "What do you want from me, Carmen? Forgiveness? Redemption? I can't give you that." Tears welled in Carmen's eyes. "I don't know what I want. I miss you. I miss us. What we had." "What we had is gone," Reed said firmly. "You destroyed it, and now we both have to live with that." He turned to look at the house again, watching as the little girl ran into her father's arms, squealing as he lifted her up and spun her around. "Look at them," Reed said softly. "That could have been us. A family. A future. But you threw it all away for what? A fling with a coworker who didn't even care about you." Carmen sobbed quietly beside him. "I know, Reed. I know. I've replayed every decision over and over in my head. If I could just go back." "But you can't," Reed interrupted. "None of us can. All we can do is move forward." He turned to face her fully. "I'm not angry anymore, Carmen. I'm not even hurt. I'm just done. This chapter of our lives is over. It's time for both of us to move on." Carmen wiped her eyes, nodding slowly. "You're right. I know you're right. I don't know how to let go." Reed's expression softened slightly. "You'll figure it out?" "We both will. But not together. Never again." He stepped back, ready to leave. "Goodbye, Carmen. I hope you find whatever you're looking for, but it won't be from me." As he walked back to his car, Reed heard Carmen call out one last time. "Reed, are you happy?" Reed paused, considering her question. Without turning back, he answered, "I'm getting there. And that's enough for now." He got into his car and drove away, leaving Carmen and the fragments of their past behind. As he merged onto the highway and headed back to his new apartment, his new life, Reed felt lighter than he had in years. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while he felt ready to face whatever came next. He had weathered the storm of betrayal and emerged stronger, more resilient. The game was over, and Reed Monroe had the last laugh. As the city skyline came into view, a small smile tugged at his lips. The future was his to shape now, free from the weight of broken promises and shattered trust. And as he drove toward that future, Reed felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope.